She stepped into the bank, dressed in her finest, anticipating a simple check deposit from her son. Instead, she watched it being shredded before her very eyes. What the teller couldn't have known was that her son wasn't just anyone. He was the prominent face on their lobby screen. And what transpired next altered everything. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness isn't merely a narrative. It's a profound testament to the quiet strength and unwavering pursuit of fairness in places often overlooked. If this is your initial visit, I extend a warm invitation for you to share your viewing location in the comments below. And if compelling stories like this resonate with you, challenge your perspective, or provoke thought, please consider subscribing and activating the bell icon. We amplify voices that deserve recognition daily. Thank you for being here. Now let's delve into the story. It was the type of morning that held too much promise for the devastation it was about to unleash. The air in Savannah, Georgia, was gentle with early sunlight, warming the pavements that bordered historic Bull Street. Birds chirped above the soft hum of lawn sprinklers, and shop fronts were just stirring to life. Marlene Hughes emerged from her modest craftsman bungalow with an effortless elegance that commanded attention. At 65, she embodied quiet dignity, her lavender church dress meticulously pressed and deliberately flowing around her knees. She wore the gold earrings received on her 30th wedding anniversary. Her aged leather purse, worn at the handle, contained only her ID, a rarely used lipstick and an envelope that caused her hands to tremble. It was a check. One she hadn't requested, one she almost didn't cash. Her son, Elijah, had sent it the previous week. $9,800 to assist, he'd casually mentioned over the phone. Her water heater had failed and she'd mentioned it in passing. She hadn't intended for it to become anything significant, but by the following day a courier had arrived with the envelope, accompanied by a handwritten note in Elijah's precise block letters. "Ma, this isn't charity. This is thanks. Cash it." Elijah. Elijah Hughes, founder and CEO of Hughes Renewables, one of the nation's fastest-growing solar infrastructure firms, had always been that kind of son. Subtly generous, intensely private. The sort of man who had navigated boardrooms that prioritized his race over his talent, who never publicized his achievements because, to him, success still meant ensuring his mother never had to ask. Yet as Marlene passed through the glass doors of First Dominion Bank, she didn't feel like the mother of anyone noteworthy. The building had transformed since her last visit. New LED screens lined the back wall, gleaming with corporate slogans and community partnership announcements. She had banked here for over 2 decades. She recalled when it was a family credit union, where tellers knew your name and the floors didn't smell of machine oil and disinfectant. But now it was sleek, swift, sterile. She approached the counter and waited. The young teller on the left, tan blazer, almond nails, the kind of professional who only looked up when essential, finally acknowledged her. "Yes," the woman stated blandly. Marlene offered a faint smile. "I'd like to deposit this check, please." The teller took it without expression, but the moment her gaze fell upon the figures and signature, something in her demeanor shifted. "Is this yours?" the teller inquired, her tone already laced with suspicion. "Yes," Marlene replied softly, "it's from my son." The teller made no effort to conceal her disbelief. She inverted the check, scrutinizing the name. "Elijah Hughes," she read aloud slowly. "And who exactly is he?" "My son," Marlene reiterated, firmer this time. "He owns a renewable energy firm." The pause was chilling, not long in duration but heavy with judgment. "This is a substantial amount," the teller finally remarked. "Almost 10,000. I'm going to need to verify this. I can give you his number or even..." But before Marlene could complete her sentence, the woman reached across, picked up the check as if it were contaminated, and fed it into the shredder beside her desk. The whirring of the blades consumed the silence, then expelled it as something sharper. It wasn't just the check that was torn apart. It was something deeper, something ancient, something Marlene had carried for a lifetime. "Excuse me," she uttered, her breath shallow. "If it's legitimate," the teller stated dismissively, "he can issue another one. But we don't process suspicious deposits, especially from individuals who cannot verify the source." A man in line behind Marlene scoffed. A woman in heels whispered, "Unbelievable." And yet the teller moved on, beckoning the next customer forward as if the moment had been utterly insignificant. Marlene stood motionless, her legs wanting to move, but her dignity demanded she remain. She retreated slowly, clutching the edge of her purse. The lavender sleeves of her dress suddenly felt too vibrant. She walked to the waiting area and sat, uncertain if her legs would support her otherwise. Her hands trembled, her breath struggling to steady. She hadn't been treated like that since. Well, not since she was a teenager in the Mississippi Delta, back when signs still dictated which water fountain to use. What struck her wasn't merely the degradation. It was its casualness, its clinical precision, its professionalism, like a silent verdict delivered without trial. She gazed up at the bank's digital screen above the entrance. It cycled through advertisements, loan options, savings accounts, small business partnerships. And then, as if by a strange twist of fate, there he was. Elijah's face, sharp suit, calm, serious gaze. The caption beneath the photo read, Elijah Hughes, CEO of Hughes Renewables, proud partner of First Dominion Bank. Marlene's breath hitched. The screen changed again, another advertisement, then another. But the damage was already done, not to her but to them. And this time the teller wasn't shredding paper. She had shredded trust, and trust has a way of revealing its wounds for all to see. Marlene Hughes sat in the rigid vinyl chair, hands clasped in her lap like a schoolgirl awaiting reprimand. The chill of the lobby had begun to permeate her skin, but a deeper cold emanated from within, the cold of being doubted, dismissed, and discarded. She gazed at her lap, her lavender dress soft against trembling fingers, and pondered how many other women had occupied that exact spot, holding truth in their hands only for it to be misconstrued as a fabrication. A teller had not just shredded a check. She had shredded evidence of affection, of care, of decades of hard-earned self-respect. Marlene had been many things in her life. A widow before 40, a nurse for 29 years, a church choir leader, a devoted mother, a woman who paid off her mortgage a year early. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Not to the young woman behind the counter. Not to the eyes that had regarded her with quiet suspicion. All that mattered was her appearance, her age, her demeanor, as if all these elements amounted to a risk. No one rushed to her aid, no manager emerged. The woman behind the counter moved on to the next customer with practiced indifference, smiling now, even joking. Marlene observed the performance unfold. How effortless it was to alter one's tone depending on who stood at the counter. She recalled telling Elijah when he was 10 and winning spelling bees, that the world wouldn't always applaud him, that some spaces would shrink the moment he entered. She detested being right. She was still lost in thought when she noticed whispers. A man near the coffee machine gestured toward the screen above the lobby, the one displaying images and slogans. Another customer glanced from the monitor to Marlene, then back again. Something had shifted, not within her but around her. Then came the sharp clack of polished shoes on tile. A man in a blue suit, mid-40s, exuding the confidence only someone with a key card and corner office could possess, strode from a back hallway. Marlene recognized him. His name was printed on the brass plaque next to the glass-walled office behind the counter. Stephen Greer, branch manager. She had seen him once or twice before, always conversing with younger clients or departing with a golf bag. He had never spoken to her, until now. Mrs. Hughes? He inquired, his voice soft but urgent. Marlene looked up slowly, her expression unreadable. Yes. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Could we speak in my office? His tone had changed, suddenly formal, almost deferential. His gaze flickered to the screen above them, then quickly away. The image displayed, Elijah Hughes smiling in his dark suit beside a First Dominion logo, glowed quietly behind them, like an accusation. Marlene rose slowly, her legs aching not from age but from self-control. She followed Greer through the glass doors, past the desks and screens and private conversations. She uttered not a word, she didn't need to. Inside he gestured toward a chair. She remained standing. I want to begin by sincerely apologizing, he stated. We had no idea. No, she interrupted, her voice low and steady. You had no interest in knowing. Greer hesitated. That's not what I meant. But it's what happened. He swallowed hard. The teller, Danielle, she's relatively new, still in training technically. I assure you her actions don't reflect our values. Marlene tilted her head. Your teller destroyed a legitimate check from a client whose face you're proud to display 5 feet from the door. She didn't call to verify, she didn't ask for ID. She just decided I didn't belong. So tell me, Mr. Greer, what does reflect your values? The question lingered in the air. I don't know how to answer that, he admitted. Marlene finally sat, slow and deliberate. Then maybe that's the problem. She wasn't interested in apologies that materialized only after exposure. She was interested in the decay that quietly inhabited the corners of polite systems, the kind of decay that smiled when it said, "Next please," but rotted nonetheless. Greer leaned forward. Your son, Mr. Hughes, is an important client. If there's anything we can do. She met his eyes. You're not trying to fix the damage. You're trying to manage the fallout. He blinked. I've been banking here for over 20 years, she continued, and in less than 5 minutes, your employee managed to obliterate every ounce of trust one thought I had. You can't shred a check and expect me to reassemble it with an apology. Outside the glass wall, more eyes were on them now. The bank, so confident in its procedures, was suddenly aware of its vulnerability. Inside, Greer was nodding furiously, attempting to regain control. We'll cover the check in full immediately and corporate will be informed. I promise you that. Marlene didn't respond. She reached into her purse, retrieved a small notepad and tore off a page. This is Elijah's number. If you want to explain this, do it to him. I'm done here. Greer took the paper with both hands as if it might burn him. She rose again, the lavender of her dress catching the late morning light through the glass. As she stepped out of the office, the digital screen changed once more. There was Elijah again, this time standing beside the mayor, a quote beneath him in bold white text. Progress means everyone, not just the privileged. The irony was sharper than the shredder's teeth. Marlene walked past the teller counter. Danielle was no longer there. Her chair was empty. Another teller glanced at Marlene, unsure whether to appear apologetic or fearful. Marlene offered neither the satisfaction. She opened the bank's glass door, stepped into the sunlight and paused for a long breath. They had shredded a piece of paper, but what they truly tore apart was something far more difficult to replace. And now it wasn't just about a mother and her check. It was about what that check represented and the systems that refused to acknowledge her worth. The hum of Elijah's Tesla diminished as he smoothly guided it into a parking spot outside the First Dominion Bank in downtown Atlanta. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that didn't promise rain but held a certain weight in the air nonetheless, as if the city itself was holding its breath. He hadn't intended to come in person. His assistant had already dispatched an email to the bank's executive team that morning. But emails weren't sufficient. Not this time. Not after what his mother had endured while wearing her best lavender dress. Not after a teller had regarded her with doubt where respect should have been. When Elijah pushed through the bank's glass doors, heads turned, not because he was famous, but because everyone already knew. The story had outpaced the building. It had leaped from whispered disbelief in the lobby to Twitter threads and morning radio shows. Someone had captured a photo of Marlene sitting in the waiting area the day before, slightly hunched, her hands folded over her purse as if bracing against something invisible. Alongside it, they'd posted a screenshot of the bank's rotating digital advertisement with Elijah's name emblazoned across the bottom. The caption read, "They shredded a check from this man's mother, then aired his face on their screen." In under 24 hours, it had been shared over 70,000 times. Stephen Greer, the branch manager, was already waiting. His smile was strained, his eyes darting to the onlookers who feigned disinterest. A second employee hovered awkwardly near the teller counter. Greer took a step forward and extended his hand. "Mr. Hughes, thank you for..." Elijah didn't take the hand. "You know why I'm here." Greer cleared his throat. "We deeply regret the treatment your mother received. There's no excuse. We're already reviewing staff procedures." And, Elijah interjected, "Where is the teller who destroyed the check?" His voice was calm but carried authority, like a courtroom had convened. "She's been placed on leave, pending review." "Leave," Elijah repeated. "Not termination?" "We have to follow internal processes," Greer began, but Elijah shook his head. "So your internal process is to protect her paycheck before protecting my mother's dignity." A sharp silence descended across the lobby. Conversations paused. Phones were slowly raised, some pretending to check emails but clearly recording. "This isn't just about my mother," Elijah continued. "This is about how easily you believed a black woman in her 60s, someone who's banked here for 2 decades, couldn't possibly be connected to success. That speaks volumes. Greer shifted, sweat forming along his brow. Mr. Hughes, we're committed to addressing this. The corporate team is. Your corporate team placed my face on that screen, Elijah stated, turning to gesture at the bank's advertising monitor, where his keynote from the Atlanta Economic Equity Conference now flashed on loop. They use my image to show diversity and progress. Meanwhile, your staff sees my mother and assumes fraud. From the corner of the room, a woman stepped out from behind the teller row. Elijah recognized her. Older, kind. She was the one who had quietly approached Marlene the day before. She didn't even ask for ID, the woman said softly. Didn't pick up the phone. She just shredded it. Elijah looked at her. What's your name? Denise Carter. I've worked here 15 years. I watched it happen and I'm ashamed I didn't speak up sooner. He nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement and alliance. The others in the room were quiet, but something in the silence had shifted. It was no longer polite avoidance. It was recognition. Elijah turned back to Greer. I'm not here for an apology. I'm here with this. He pulled out a folded paper and handed it over. That's a list of all our nonprofit and corporate partners who bank with First Dominion through Hughes Renewables. You want to keep those relationships, then this doesn't end with one disciplinary review. Greer scanned the list and visibly paled. There were over 20 names, some with contracts worth 6 and 7 figures. Also, Elijah added, tell your PR department not to write another soulless statement. Don't say you regret the experience. Say what happened. Name it. Or people like my mother will keep getting erased by politeness. Greer fumbled a nod, overwhelmed. We'll get this to corporate immediately. Elijah glanced at the screen once more. The quote from his last keynote flashed below his image. Equity isn't a speech, it's a standard. The irony twisted like a knot in his chest. He turned toward the gathered customers, many of whom were now watching openly. My mother is one of the most disciplined, selfless people I've ever known, he said. She's the reason I'm on that screen. She made sacrifices you can't fit into a resume. And when she finally accepted help from her own son, you treated her like a criminal. No one moved, not even Greer. And if that's how you treat a woman whose son's face is 5 feet from your front door, Elijah added, how are you treating the people with no screen at all? With that he walked out, not to cheers, not to applause, but to a silence that felt louder than anything else in the room. Outside, the gray sky cracked with light, and Elijah stood for a moment on the sidewalk, letting the cold bite at his fingers. He didn't check his phone, he didn't need to. He knew the world was already watching. But he wasn't finished because it wasn't about revenge. It was about something harder, something slower. He was building something deeper than a response. He was building reckoning and from there perhaps finally repair. Marlene Hughes had spent most of her life believing in the power of silence. Her grace was not forged in loud pronouncements or protest signs. It was shaped in kitchens filled with steam and late-night shifts where dignity was worn like a second skin. She'd endured more than most would ever know, not because she condoned injustice, but because she'd been raised to survive it quietly. But now her silence had become a headline. She hadn't watched the full clip of Elijah's visit to the bank, only segments shown on television, but she could feel the repercussions in the way neighbors lingered longer at her gate, and how local reporters left business cards in her mailbox, and in the way a little girl on the sidewalk whispered, "That's her," as she passed. It made her both proud and uncomfortably exposed. The morning after Elijah's public stand, Marlene sat at her kitchen table, folding clothes with mechanical patience. The hum of the news in the background was familiar now, anchors uttering her name, recounting her story in crisp, precise voices. They described the incident as a banking mishap, a case of mistaken judgment, or the now ubiquitous phrase, alleged racial bias. But it wasn't alleged to Marlene. It was her reality. She looked down at the church dress she had meticulously ironed that morning. It lay across her lap like a memory, no longer soft with comfort but heavy with the weight of what it now represented. She hadn't worn it since the day of the incident. Somehow it felt altered, as if even fabric could recall humiliation. Elijah had called 3 times that morning. She'd answered the third. "Ma," he said softly, "the press wants to speak to you directly. Sit down. But only if you're ready." Marlene hesitated. "What for?" "To tell your side." Not just what happened but what it means. She looked out the window, watching as a neighbor raked leaves into neat rows. I don't want to become a symbol. You already are, Elijah said. But now you get to decide what kind. Later that week they sat down with Dana Wu, a local reporter known for gentle interviews that allowed people to speak freely. The setting was Marlene's living room, framed by handmade curtains and an old clock that had marked every chapter of Elijah's childhood. Mrs. Hughes, Dana began gently, when you entered that bank, what did you expect? Marlene smiled faintly, her voice steady. To deposit a check. That's all. And when they destroyed it? Marlene looked down at her hands. I thought, so this is what they see when they look at me. Not a mother, not a customer, not a woman who's never bounced a check in her life, but a lie waiting to be disproven. She paused. It wasn't the money, it was how quickly they decided I didn't belong. The clip aired that evening. In it, Marlene wasn't angry, she wasn't even emotional. That's what made it powerful. He was calm, clear, human. And the world listened. Within hours, the interview had circulated across social media platforms, accompanied by comments like, "She speaks with so much grace," and, "This reminds me of my mom." People shared their own stories. Moments when their parents or grandparents had been disrespected in quiet, crushing ways. Elijah watched the numbers climb, but it wasn't the views that mattered. It was the voices, new ones, honest ones, finally being heard. A teacher in Kansas wrote to him, I played your mother's interview for my civics class. My students are asking better questions now. But even as the public praised her composure, Marlene sat in her kitchen and wondered what it would have been like if the screen hadn't been playing Elijah's face that day. Would they have apologized? Would anyone have believed her? She told Elijah one evening, don't let them rewrite it. Don't let them turn it into a misunderstanding. It wasn't. He nodded. I won't. The bank issued a second apology, this one longer, more carefully worded and slightly more human. It named her. It acknowledged what happened. But it still didn't name the teller or utter the word that everyone else already had. Racism. Marlene didn't comment on the apology, she didn't need to. Instead, she accepted an invitation to speak just once at a financial literacy event for seniors. It wasn't a media circus. Just a community gathering inside a church basement where folding chairs and mediocre coffee lent it the warmth of truth. She didn't lecture, she shared. When I was 24, she said, I walked into a bank to open my first account. I had a job. I had ID. They told me I didn't qualify. I didn't argue. I just left, thought maybe I'd done something wrong. The room was quiet. They never explained, just looked at me like I was hoping for something I didn't deserve. She paused. I've been proper all my life, polite, responsible. But that day in the bank, it wasn't about how I carried myself. It was about what they assumed. A woman in the front row wiped her eyes. A man in the back whispered, same thing happened to my wife. Marlene's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I didn't speak up to be famous, she said. I spoke up because the next person might not have a son on a screen. That line would be quoted in newspapers, on podcasts, and in city council meetings. But to Marlene it was just the truth. Back at home, she placed the shredded remnants of the check, returned to her in a sealed envelope, into a small box beside old family photos. Not out of bitterness, but as a reminder that even paper can carry the weight of proof. And sometimes a mother's quiet voice can echo louder than any screen. By the time the story of Marlene Hughes had crossed state lines and entered national discourse, it was no longer just about a check. It had become a mirror, one held up to a nation that too often averted its gaze from the quiet, accumulating pain of ordinary people who bore injustice with grace because shouting rarely yielded results for them. The footage from the community event, Marlene's calm voice filling a church basement, her words steady as stone, had been shared more than 2 million times, not for its spectacle but for its authenticity. She wasn't a celebrity, she didn't raise her voice. But what she said struck a chord in a country that claimed to know better, yet too often acted as if it didn't. Journalists, organizers, and everyday Americans began posing the same question. If this could happen to her, a loyal customer and mother of one of the bank's most celebrated clients, what happens to those who don't have a public platform or a powerful last name? Elijah understood. The momentum had shifted. What began as a defense of his mother's dignity was now a demand for systemic introspection. He stood before cameras with greater intentionality now, not out of anger but out of obligation. Each microphone, each interview, each headline wasn't about amplifying outrage. It was about deepening awareness. He spoke at forums on financial equity, met with community bankers, and even addressed a Senate subcommittee on discrimination in commercial services. But through it all he made one thing clear: don't turn this into a feel-good moment. This isn't about a happy ending. It's about the people still being quietly denied. The Bradford Initiative, the foundation Elijah launched in his mother's name, began with 2 rooms above a barbershop. Now it had expanded into a city-wide network offering resources for the elderly, financial literacy workshops, and bias training for bank employees, not as a punitive measure but as a path forward. Marlene visited the space once a week. She'd sit in the corner, folding mailers or assisting seniors with forms, sipping weak coffee from a floral mug someone had labeled Mama H. She never sought attention, but visitors often sought her out just to shake her hand or say, "You reminded me of my mother." Outside the bank where it all began, flowers still appeared on the steps. Some brought notes, others their stories. One card read, "They looked at me the same way they looked at you. Thank you for showing them we matter." The bank's corporate office had issued another statement, this one longer, more humble, more specific. They acknowledged Marlene by name. They admitted fault. They announced new diversity leadership policy overhauls, and dedicated outreach programs to rebuild trust in communities they had long taken for granted. Elijah, however, was cautious. "Policy change without culture change is just paper," he said. "We don't need better apologies. We need better assumptions." But the real transformation wasn't occurring in boardrooms or press releases. It was in the whispers shared between strangers in line at banks, and the teachers using Marlene's story to teach empathy, in the bank employees who now paused before making snap judgments. It was in the mother who brought her daughter into the credit union for the first time and said, "This is what safe looks like." For Marlene it was simpler than that. Change was the feeling of walking into a room and not being second-guessed. It was the joy of knowing her son didn't just succeed in business. He succeeded in giving others a chance to be seen. One evening she sat with Elijah on her porch. The crickets buzzed and the world felt slower than usual. "You sure you're not tired of all this yet?" Elijah asked, nudging her gently. "I've been tired since 1989, she chuckled, "but tired don't mean done." He smiled. "You've said that before. And I'll keep saying it till someone listens." There was silence for a while. Then she added, "I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to be treated fair. That's not asking too much, is it?" "No," Elijah said, his voice soft, "it never was." What started in a sterile bank lobby became a spark, a reckoning, not fueled by rage but by resilience. One mother's quiet endurance had awakened a national conscience, and her story became a guide for every person who'd ever been made to feel insignificant despite standing tall. Marlene Hughes didn't shout to be heard. She simply articulated the truth and the world finally listened. Marlene Hughes never sought the limelight. She didn't enter that bank in San Francisco to make a statement or ignite a national dialogue. All she desired was to deposit a check, one her son had sent her out of appreciation and affection. But what should have been a straightforward transaction unraveled into a moment of profound humiliation. A moment that revealed something far greater than one woman's experience. It exposed how swiftly dignity can be disregarded when unconscious bias enters the room before you do. From the shredded check to the cold waiting room, from the ignored requests to the impersonal apologies, Marlene endured it all with quiet strength. Yet it was not merely her pain that resonated with the nation. It was her composure, her calm refusal to be broken, her ability to speak the truth without bitterness. And when her son Elijah stepped forward, not with outrage but with clarity and purpose, he carried not only his mother's voice but the voices of so many who had been overlooked and disrespected in silence. This story could have concluded in anger. Instead, it blossomed into action. Together, Marlene and Elijah transformed hurt into healing. They launched workshops, initiatives and conversations. They challenged institutions not through protest but through presence. They didn't just demand change, they exemplified what it looked like. What began as one mother's mistreatment became a wake-up call for an entire system, urging people across the country to reevaluate how we treat each other. Not based on wealth, appearance or assumptions, but on shared humanity. The lesson here runs deeper than just race or class. It's about recognizing the inherent value in people before they have to prove it. It's about the perils of judging character based on attire, skin tone, or a surname. And it's about the extraordinary power of ordinary individuals who choose to speak up, not just for themselves, but for those still waiting in silence. In today's world where so many are dismissed without a second thought, this story reminds us, dignity isn't something you earn by status, it's something you are owed by right. Marlene didn't want recognition, she wanted respect. And that makes her story not only unforgettable but essential. So if this story moved you, if it made you reflect on the quiet strength in someone you know, or reminded you of a time when you wished someone had spoken up, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to this channel to support stories that matter. Stories that reflect not just what's wrong with the world, but what's possible when we choose to respond with courage, compassion, and truth. Because sometimes all it takes is one voice, one moment, one check shredded but not silenced to change everything. Stay with us for more stories like this.